Good morning. I want to welcome you to the April 28, 2014 workshop of the Orlando City Council. Commissioners, today we're going to once again focus on the city's budget. Last council meeting, or last council day, we had our first workshop on the city's budget, and we're starting a little bit early this year because we need to work through a few things. Last week's workshop was built on the previous workshops from the last couple of years where we talked about what the state mandated revenue caps would do in terms of limiting our city's ability to grow revenue to cover expanding expenses. During the downturn, we made prudent financial decisions to make sure that we kept our reserves fully funded, that we paid our pension obligations rather than putting it off like some communities, and we kept our bond ratings high. Last session, we looked at some of the expenditure side. Today, we're going to look at some of the revenue side of the equation. Rebecca, you want to start us out?
Thank you, Mayor. Good morning, Commissioners. Last workshop, as the Mayor indicated, we explored trends in our budget since the economic downturn in 2009. We demonstrated that significant revenues in our general fund budget are growing at rates that are less than the rate of growth of expenditures. Property tax growth is restrained by various exemptions, growth caps, and reduction in values, and slow growth in property values after that. And our OUC dividend has been essentially flat since 2006 and is currently $8 million behind CPI for that period. In past years, we filled the gaps formed by these conditions with prior year's unspent revenues left over after filling our general fund reserves to the maximum in our policy. And because of the extensive cuts that have been made over the past 6 years, $123 million in the aggregate and $41 million annually recurring, there are not significant further cuts that can be made without significantly affecting service levels or revenue production associated with expenses. Today, we're going to review other budget balancing techniques such as revenue enhancement options or cost recovery opportunities that are available to you to consider in formulating a solution to the revenue shortfall the city's been addressing in past years with prior year savings. We'll again wrap up with the upcoming events on our budget development calendar and answer any questions on this topic that you may have. First, revenue options. As background, the city has really 3 different sources of authorization to raise revenues to support the service levels desired by the public and adopted by you. The first source is the state constitution, which provides the authority to levy property tax revenue. Under the Constitution, and within the Constitution, there's many limitations on our ability to levy this tax, such as exemptions and growth caps. Under Home Rule authority, the city can set proprietary fees, such as wastewater or solid waste fees, regulatory fees, such as impact fees or planning fees, or special assessments, such as decorative lighting or public amenities. Finally, other revenue sources have been authorized by the Florida legislature, such as gas tax, local option sales taxes, and specialty taxes, such as communication service tax and utility service tax. Some of these require a countywide option with a referendum necessary to establish them. And we'll go through all of that in detail as we move forward. Within the state constitution, ad valorem taxes are subject to limitations. There's a 10 mil cap for county purposes, a 10 mil cap for municipal purposes, and a 10 mil cap for school purposes, and these are separate caps. The millage fixed by law for a county providing municipal services, and then a millage fixed by law and approved by voters for special districts. Components of the municipal millage rate includes the rate that you set every year for essentially maintenance and operation of the government. It also includes any general obligation debt service. We have not had general obligation debt millage for a number of years. And then any special district millage that's subject to the 10 mil cap. And that 10 mil cap includes the Downtown Development Board 1 mil. So it's a combination, our city purposes is a combination of city millage and the Downtown Development Board. History of our millage here. is from 2008, or 2008, we had $4.93, 93.07 cents as the millage, and then we raised it to $5.65 in 2009, and it stayed at 5.65 cents. There has been no debt since 1980. I showed you this slide at our last presentation, and I think it's an important one to keep in mind, and that is that we have our expenditures essentially progressing at inflation or better, depending on the mix of things that we're talking about. And if we had just kept up with inflation, we would have had $28 million more. Just inflation, no rate changes, just inflation. We would have $28 million more in our ad valorem tax than we do, or than we did in 2014. We anticipate, as you can see, that this gap is widening pretty much each year as those caps stay in place. And so we're not going to see a recovery per se. This is going to continue in the way that it is, and it requires some action to be taken at this point. I get asked this question a lot. Actually, I got asked this morning this question. And that is, what's the value of one mil or $1 on the tax rate? And last year it was 18.1 million. The year before it was 17.5 million. If we go back to 2008, it was 24.2 million. So you can kind of see how all of the property values, the caps, and you know, a static tax rate has actually had a fairly significant impact. And as you'll note, for the last 4 years, that has not changed appreciably. I think sometimes it's convenient to kind of look at what the impacts are going to be on a particular property with regard to, you know, our tax rates and how they've been applied since 2009. This graph actually goes back to 2007 to kind of show you the changes that we saw even before the economic downturn. And as you can see, our taxable values included a great deal of Save Our Homes. That's the green is the taxable value. The red are the exemptions, the homestead exemptions, and the pink is the Save Our Homes. And as you can see, we've only now just started to gain Save Our Homes differential in 2014 for this last year's budget. So, you know, if you can see, look at the green line. The green line for this $200,000 property is pretty static. So their taxes in dollars haven't changed, but our expenses in dollars have. And right now that change is essentially $183 per 200,000 taxable value, as you can see here. And you can see how it's continuing to widen, and we'll see, you know, unless we have a fairly significant run-up in property taxes so that we can get to that 7%, which is our cap. Our cap is about 7% with a mix of commercial and homestead that we have, or a non-homestead and homestead, then you know, that's probably going to continue. Looking at a high-value commercial property, this is a commercial property valued at $30 million. And you can kind of see how their valuation, taxable value, has progressed. And in 2011, you can see that this particular property that we pulled actually had some non-homestead cap accumulated in 2011. But essentially, you can see the taxes that have been paid on this property have been static pretty much over the last 5 years. A little bit of a bump in 2011, but not much. And that's about a $48,000 difference in taxes from maintaining CPI on that particular commercial property, as you can see here. If we are to make changes in millage rates, and some of the commissioners made comments about this last workshop, we will need to approve a preliminary millage rate on the meeting of July the 28th. To do that millage rate needs to be at least the size of the final millage rate, or else we have to do additional notifications to property owners. So we want to be sure that we've kind of gone through the process and have a good idea of what we intend to do in September when it's finally set. In August, trim notices based on this rate.
Commissioner
Can you
Lyman.
repeat what you just
Okay.
said? I didn't-
Every year, we set a preliminary millage rate on July the 28th. That is the millage rate that's used in the trim notice process. The commissioners can set a millage rate later, lower than that, or equal to that, with no notice. But if you choose to change the millage rate and make it higher than that, then we have to notify all of the property owners that that is going to be a different rate. And then in September, we have the two public hearings and adopt the final millage on the second public hearing. And as I said, the preliminary millage rate can be reduced but cannot be increased without notification. With regard to voting requirements, a simple majority is required for the adjusted rollback rate with growth for change in per capita income, two-thirds majority for 10% above the adjusted rollback rate, adjusted for per capita income change, and unanimous up to the constitutional maximum of 10 mils. However, having said that, because of all of the calculations and it's very intricate to do these calculations, we can actually go to the 10 mil cap with just a simple majority, given the way that the numbers are calculated at this point. And that has to do with the fact that our taxes have, the total taxes have pretty much stayed flat for the last few years. Moving to home rule authority and away from the constitutional authority are proprietary fees. They can be established that are reasonable and are in relation to the government, the value of the governmental provided service. Examples are admission fees, user fees, utility fees, franchise fees for the right to use right-of-way by utilities, and a number of other fees. And I'm sure you're familiar with a lot of these. They come, most of them come before you periodically. All of them come before you periodically for adjustment, and so you'll be familiar with a number of those. There are also regulatory fees. The regulatory fees are those which may be imposed pursuant to a local government's police powers in the exercise of a sovereign function. A fee, by definition in the law, cannot exceed the regulated activities cost. And these are generally required to be applied solely to, the revenue needs to be applied solely to the regulated activities cost where the fee is imposed. So in other words, you can't take that to another fund or something like that. It can't be diverted. So you can't take one fee, for instance, say an impact fee, and move it over to the general fund and use it for operations. Special assessments are another type of revenue that we can produce locally. And this is a compulsory levy that's made against certain properties to defray all or part of the cost of a specific capital improvement or service deemed to benefit primarily those properties. Home rule revenue sources are typically used to construct and maintain those services. And then to get a special assessment established, that there has to be a special benefit that is derived by the property owner from the improvement or service. And then the assessment has to be fairly and reasonably apportioned among the properties that receive that benefit. There's not an opportunity to exempt any particular property from this. It is so long as they're benefited. So it has to be pretty much a distribution, if you will, of the cost of the public improvement. Just a few examples of improvements and services that are approved by courts for special assessments. And beach renourishment, probably not going to be high on our list here, but downtown redevelopment, and we've used those from time to time associated with certain developments downtown. where we wanted to have additional public parking, or we wanted to have open space and public gathering spaces constructed around the development. Garbage disposal, we don't use that here, but Orange County does for its garbage disposal. Sewer improvements and stormwater management services, which we do have. Fire protection, as well, is one area where special assessments can be used. Now, this is not an entire fire operation. We'll talk about that in a little more, but the suppression portion of our fire department activities. These special assessments are generally collected on the annual ad valorem tax bill through the uniform billing statute here in the state, and it's characterized as a non-ad valorem assessment on that tax bill. Just a few city examples. We have proprietary fees here in the city for stormwater, wastewater, and solid waste and parking. We have regulatory fees, for instance, for building permits and impact fees. Another proprietary fee for EMS transport. And then, but for decorative streetlights and some of those downtown redevelopment projects, that was done through a special assessment. Generally speaking, proprietary fees are handled outside the general fund and special funds, and they're not generally available for us to use in the general fund. There are limitations associated with those particular fees, and so as a result, we have a wastewater fund, we have a stormwater fund, we have a parking fund, and all of those activities are outside of the general fund. The city cannot charge regulatory fees greater than the actual cost to provide the regulated activity. So it's not a general purpose revenue, it's a cost offset. So it doesn't, we can't just go out and raise that to be able to take some of that and bring it into the general fund, for instance. And from the perspective of special assessments, obviously beach renourishment is not going to be something we're bound to do. But as I said before, downtown redevelopment, those special assessments are housed in a special assessment fund and have come from the downtown CRA from a development agreement perspective. And then garbage disposal, it's already proprietary, it's already set aside. Sewer improvements, already an impact fee. Stormwater management, it's a proprietary fee. And then fire protection, we don't have yet, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit. For a fire special assessment, the property assessed must derive a special benefit from the improvement or service. So in this case, property has to benefit from fire protection. It is a relief of threat or cost burden to the property owner. It's an assurance that fire protection will come on call, and it's a maintenance of the minimum insurance rating so that people can get insurance for their house or their business. This assessment must be fairly and reasonably apportioned between properties receiving the benefit, and that's typically on the relative value of improvements and readiness to serve. And we're going to go into that in a little more detail. Considerations that we need to keep in mind with regard to a fire assessment are first, the Supreme Court of the state of Florida has determined that emergency medical services, or EMS, primarily benefit individuals, not property. And so therefore, it can't be funded from this special assessment. So first of all, if we're going to do a fire assessment, we have to take away EMS and only look at the fire suppression portion of of that budget. Second, government-owned parcels, or those that don't benefit from fire protection, such as submerged lands or undevelopable lands, that sort of thing, are excluded from the benefited property list. And then finally, the methodology can include certain institutional property in the property list, but the city can exclude them from the assessment, such as churches and nonprofit organizations. If we take our fire department and we break it down, now this is based on the 2012 budget. We did a study in 2012, and it's a study we can repeat. But the total fire department budget at that particular point, net of outside funded items such as the SAFER grant and some of those kinds of things, resulted in $81,640,508. And if we take the fire or the transport, the ALS transport services out of that, because as I indicated before, those cannot be an expense that's paid from a fire assessment, is $41,700,000 roughly, leaving us about $40 million that would be eligible to be funded through a fire assessment. In addition, I should point out that counties have had the ability to levy a special millage rate for fire protection services. It's called a Municipal Service Taxing Unit, or sometimes referred to as MSTU. You'll hear that. Orange County charges to their incorporated citizens 2.2437 mils per $1,000 evaluation on that. And interestingly, it produces just about that same amount of money, that $40 million that we just talked about. And as I indicated, we're pretty much the same when we talk about attributed to fire protection or suppression, fire suppression services. There are two different methods that one can use to calculate the fire assessment. The first is called a cost per call type methodology. The second is a two-tiered methodology based on the cost of readiness to serve and then applying it to a particular value of property. Tier 1 is a flat amount that's applied to every property in the city. And then Tier 2 is a rate that's designed to cover sort of above a minimum additional property, but up to a maximum. Interestingly, there is very, very few fire claims through insurance companies that exceed $8 million. And that's because the larger the property, the more likely that it has some type of self-suppression type, either the construction is such or there are suppression equipment such as sprinkler systems and other kinds of things that limit that. So we believe that there is an appropriate maximum that should be established if we go that direction. There are other taxes and fees and revenues that are available to us. I want to go through those. Communication services tax we've had for many years here. It applies to telecommunication type services, video, direct home satellite, various types of services along that line. And if we don't levy permit fees for those things, then we can levy this tax up to 5.22% of the service fees that are associated with those. There's a local business tax as well. The fees charged and the method by which local government grants the privilege of engaging in a business or managing a business or being in a profession or occupation within its jurisdiction. Rates can be increased or decreased up to 5% every other year with a city-county majority plus one or supermajority vote. We last increased these rates on October 1st, 2006. And a 5% increase, the maximum increase that we can make, will produce about $350,000. There are 8 different local discretionary sales surtaxes that can be enacted by local governments within the statutes of the state of Florida. One of those is dedicated to school construction, and I'm sure you're familiar with that one. These are generally, in all cases, enacted and imposed by the county. Municipal governments and school districts may receive some of these proceeds based on some type of allocation formula. And depending on the surcharge, the type of surcharge that's being imposed, it may be different. Each 1% surcharge represents, estimated by the state, $64.5 million. Of the 7 non-school surtax options, Orange County is permitted to authorize up to 4 different surcharges, but a maximum of 3% on the tax rate. The various ones that are available, the 7 that are available are listed here. There's a transportation system surtax for charter counties and regional transportation systems, a local government infrastructure surtax, a small county surcharge, which we are not, which is not available to us, an indigent care and trauma center surtax, the county public hospital surtax, only available to Miami-Dade County, and then voter-approved indigent care surtax for smaller counties that are less than 800. So you have 2 indigent cares, one for greater than 800,000 population, one for less than 800,000 population. And then finally, an emergency fire rescue services and facility surtax. Charter County and Regional Transportation System surtax is available, but only 3 of 31 counties that are eligible for this surtax actually levy it. It's available to home rule charter counties as well as counties that are that is within or under a local agreement with the Regional Transportation Authority. So, for instance, the Central Florida Regional Transportation Authority would be one. The levy is subject to the approval of a majority vote of the county's electorate. And this, you're going to hear this over and over again. This requires the county commission to establish it, and it requires a vote of the entire county to be able to have this put in place. The proceeds can be used for development, construction, operation, and maintenance of fixed guideway, rapid transit systems, bus systems, on-demand transportation systems, and services and roads and bridges. The local government infrastructure surtax is implemented by only 17 of 67 eligible counties. Actually, all of the counties are eligible for this, and can be levied at a rate of 0.5% or a full percent, half a penny or 1 penny, pursuant to an ordinance enacted by majority vote of the county's governing body and approved by voters in a county-wide referendum. Municipalities representing a majority of the county's population may initiate this surtax through the adoption of uniform resolutions calling for a referendum. However, Orange County, unincorporated Orange County, has 64% of the population in the county, so we are not in a position to be able to do that. Proceeds may be used to finance, plan, construct infrastructure, or acquire land for public recreation, conservation, or protection of natural resources. The Indigent Care and Trauma Center surtax is only levied by Hillsborough County. Non-consolidated counties with a population greater than 800,000 may impose this surtax not to exceed a half penny for the purpose of funding health care services for qualified residents. It takes an extraordinary vote of the governing body or, not and, but or, voter approval in a countywide referendum. The ordinance supporting this surtax has to define health services to qualified individuals and what that means, specifically the indigent, the medically poor, and that you have to be participating in something that's proven as a cost-effective program. The Emergency Fire Rescue Services and Facility surtax is not being levied by any eligible counties at this particular point, but it is 1 penny that can be implemented pursuant to an ordinance enacted by a majority vote of the county commission and then approved by governors, by voters in a countywide referendum. If a county has 2 separate discretionary surtaxes without expiration, they cannot add this one to it. So this is somewhat limited there. The proceeds must be expended for emergency fire rescue services and facilities. Outside of sales tax, there is one other revenue that is currently valid for cities, which is a municipal parking facility space surcharge, and this is applicable to any municipality. This is one of the only revenues that we have in the revenue manual that cities can do without either participation with other cities or counties. Hialeah, Jacksonville, Miami, Orlando, St. Petersburg, and Tampa are eligible to implement this surcharge, and then this surcharge is imposed and collected based on a percentage of the amounts charged for the sale, lease, or rental of municipal parking facilities that are open to the public. This can be used in kind of a special way. Between 60 and 80% of the revenue that's collected must be used to reduce ad valorem tax millage or to reduce non-ad valorem assessments, one of the two. No less than 20% and no more than 40% must be used to improve transportation-related items, including streets and roadways, sidewalks, landscapes, and street beautification in a downtown or urban core, and then transit, any type of transit. Shifting now to cost recovery opportunities. At the present time, the city has an agreement with GOA to provide police and fire services. For OIA, we provide 74 police positions for them. At the executive airport, we maintain 24/7 coverage for a crash truck for that particular airport. Per our agreements, the city can recover direct costs plus indirect costs, but we've never billed for the indirect cost. One of the reasons why we haven't is that in the past we didn't do a lot of this, but obviously in the past years we've gotten a little more diligent with making sure that we're charging our grants and other eligible programs for the indirect costs that the city bears for those programs. We are required, because this is an organization that's tightly coupled with the Federal Aviation Administration, we have to be sure that we are implementing this indirect cost in accordance with the federal guidelines. And the federal guidelines are established in something called OMB Circular A87. And that circular defines all the rules and all the processes that are necessary to establish an indirect cost plan. We've done that. We started doing that in 2007, and we started charging to every possible program this amount, except for GOA. And so, I think this is one opportunity that we can establish. It's $2.5 million a year, roughly. So, that is certainly something that you may want to look at. In the area of school resource officers, we have 34 positions, 34 people that are assigned to school resource officers. Their reimbursement is really for the school year, so that cuts that down to 25.75 FTEs. But there are 2 officers at each high school, 1 at each middle school, and a quarter of an officer at each elementary school. They I guess, have 4 that they go to. The financial reimbursement is $27,500 reimbursed for a full-time officer at a middle or high school for the 10-month school year, and $6,875 reimbursed for a part-time officer at the elementary schools for the 10-month school year. But as you can see, the program cost for doing this is $4.4 million. And at this particular point, we have a reimbursement of $700,000. But I should point out that discussions are underway with OCPS to determine how perhaps the OCPS could make a greater contribution to this. There's also the opportunity, if we so choose, and if we don't feel that there are better uses for these funds, forfeiture funds that are collected by OPD can also be used to fund school resource officers. So it might be that some piece of reimbursement could come from the forfeiture fund, which is outside the general fund as well. I will point out that the police use that forfeiture fund for many laudable programs and processes during the year, so it's not that it is not an available amount, or it's an available amount that's sitting idle. It's really more that if we, from a priority perspective, feel that this is a better thing to do, then this might be an option. We talked last time, too, about the OUC revenue, and I just put this slide back up so you could see it again. It's been largely flat, but I will say that their net income has been largely flat as well during this period. So I think that this is something that we should explore. I think that it's a possibility that this could be alleviated somewhat. So moving forward, we're obviously today doing our revenue and cost recovery options workshop. On May 30th, we will get a best estimate of taxable value sent to us, and this is just really a kind of a first cut at the tax roll given to us by our property appraiser, and that will help us to determine what our actual numbers are. As I've indicated to all of you, we're really not in a position right now to determine what number is what we need to raise, what the budget gap essentially is, because we haven't got all of the revenues really established at this point. But we will get something on May 30th, and that will assist us in going forward. On June 19th, we're scheduled to get the preliminary tax roll. That's a more detailed tax roll, which will give us the opportunity to really kind of drill down and get our numbers fairly firm. And on the 28th, we adopt that preliminary millage rate, as I indicated before. Trim notices will be sent August 14th. And September 3rd is the first day that we can statutorily have our first budget hearing. I suspect, though, that it will be probably timed in accordance with our city council meetings, as we typically do. And then we start the fiscal year on October 1st. So there's not a lot of time, but there's enough time. And I suspect that we will come back to you with workshops along the way as information develops and as we are in a position to share that with you. And I also wanted to indicate that my staff and myself are available to all of you for individual briefings. If you have questions or want to delve more deeply into some of these things, we're happy to do that. So with that, Mayor, I will take questions.
Thank you, Rebecca. That's a good presentation and good layout of where we need to be looking in terms of the revenue side. And again, I know this is early for council to be delving into this, but I want to make sure that everybody has a good foundation as we move towards trying to make sure that we create a budget and a budget process that allows us to do this much easier in future years than every year coming in and worrying about the fact that revenues didn't grow as much as expenditures did. So we're going to do some work this year that'll put us on good footing for years in the future. Commissioner Lynham and then Commissioner Stewart.
Thank you for that report. And I'm going to be redundant. The same redundancy for the last 10, 12 years regarding our millage. I think we have been very kind to a lot of our partners, OUC, GOA, and to our residents. And, of course, preparing to retire, I don't want to have my tax bill go up, but I think it makes sense for our survival. I thought we were wrong in 2002 when we rolled back, and we have done nothing about it because we want it to be fiscally prudent and fair to residents whose jobs have been cut, they've been laid off, and I think we've done that. But I think now we've got to think about the fair rate of millage. We have got to increase our millage. And everything we've got to increase, including OMB for GOA, doesn't have to go to the maximum limit. We've just got to start thinking about where our city wants to go, get back to doing some of the things we used to, and we don't have to go our millage based on what that rate would have been had we increased it before. But we just got to be able to pay your bills. We've got to make it fair for our residents to enjoy a beautiful city and do the things we've got to do in terms of just municipal governance. Most people don't understand our job is municipal governance. I mean, it's not flashy or anything. It's hard decisions. And so I'm going to keep saying it until my last day and next month. If you come back here before I leave, I've got to say that, Mayor. It makes sense. We've got to do this. I was here when we rolled it back. I was a little perturbed about it then. I have been. That's 12 years. That's a long time to carry a grudge. But we've got to do something about that and look at all the other opportunities to increase, not to the maximum, because county is never going to go to their maximum taxable things they can do. But we've got to take care of the city. They're not going to take care of us. So that's my recommendation until whatever that last council meeting is in May. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Stewart.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. There you go. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. A couple of quick questions, and I guess I'm trying to kind of put it all together. When you look at the discretionary sales tax, almost all of that requires a countywide referendum. Is that correct?
All of it does.
Okay. How do we benefit from a countywide referendum except through a proportional distribution of that money? Is that correct?
Yes, it's a proportional distribution, and that's what the 64.5 million per penny
Okay.
represents. And that's an estimate from some data that maybe is not all the way current. But
Okay. Let me make sure. I'm going back to the 64.5, so make sure I understand it. That's a countywide referendum, and that 64 represents our distribution of a countywide referendum.
yes,
Okay. All right. Because the idea is I want to make sure it wasn't county. Was the countywide, and that distribution is based upon what, population still?
I believe so.
Okay.
Primarily, I think there's some other adjustments to it. But
I mean, I think there's some adjustment. I think in terms of projection, and we all agree to a projection that it gets distributed that way.
Commissioner, also, I think, going back to Mobility 2020, it's either by whatever the statutory projection or whatever would be, or in agreement, in an interlocal agreement between the cities with the largest percentage of municipal population, which in our case is the city of Orlando without anybody else, and the county government, because we did a split for Mobility 2020 that was different than whatever the statutory formula was.
okay.
But that's an agreed split only for that particular purpose. Is that correct?
Yes.
One of the challenges, I've said for several years now, when you begin to start distributing taxes based upon population only, you forget the significant investment made in Orlando, especially in a downtown corridor. I don't know what, and I think I'm barking up the wrong tree because I think it's a statute. I think it's a state ordinance, but the idea of somewhere distributing some of the tax based upon the value of the property in terms of a calculation. The idea being that greater value of property is a greater response and those types of things. So I'm trying to kind of get my hand around it, my mind around it, so I can talk to somebody in the state level. That's a distribution by population just always drives me crazy because we are a concentration of population, but there are also now greater concentrations outside the city, and we're providing that level of service.
Commissioner, I hate to interrupt, but what's even a little more egregious than that is our local municipal share of state service tax, sales tax, that is also based largely on population and not how much we generate, because we generate a huge amount of sales tax in comparison to other counties
Exactly.
and get just a small percentage back.
Exactly. The other thing is, and I guess probably for my analysis is, when I talk in public, generally speaking, when I start doing the calculations, 29% of a tax bill that somebody has in the city of Orlando goes to the city of Orlando. The other 71 goes someplace else that we have no control on, but people still scream and yell at us about it. Like the 21% of that goes also to the county for county services. And I think often when we start doing work around the city, the county turns around and goes, well, you're getting the revenue, and they forget that they're also getting 21% of the revenue too in anything that we do inside. And I think we don't get some of that back in terms of the amount of services that we have. But as we move forward, I'd like to see kind of that average analysis again from you, an updated analysis of what's kind of an average house. I think we did this a couple of 3 years ago where there was kind of a lower value, higher value, highest value, discounts applied, those kind of things, to give us an idea of that percentage and as we move forward, to see what the impact will be. And then the last thing I think is, the question is on the indirect cost. Can you give me an example of the indirect cost?
Okay. This is a little complicated, kind of, I guess it's a lot of numbers.
Yeah.
But essentially, I'll just give you a good example. I'll just take my office. My office provides services for a number of different activities in the city. Some of those activities have their own revenue streams. Let's just take an example of that, the wastewater.
Yeah.
We take the central services and we allocate those costs to those direct service areas, okay? And so, for instance, a small piece of my salary, a bigger piece of some of the folks that work in my area would then be charged back to wastewater because of the activity that we support for wastewater. And that's essentially what we mean by indirect costs. Direct costs are those costs that are obvious. The employees in wastewater and all that are obviously direct costs.
Yeah.
But in the treatment, for instance, out at Iron Bridge. But our costs are still costs for that activity. And so as a result, it's an allocation of that based on factors that are established. Those factors are not just a financial allocation, but in many cases are the result of some type of activity that might be there. So it's a fairly complicated plan. We retain Certified Public Accounting Organization, KPMG, to perform this study each year for us.
Thank you. I think I'm familiar with that because we do the same thing inside the Christian Service Center in terms of allocation of my expenses back to a program for the work that I would do specifically for a program. So I'm kind of familiar with that. But the idea of recovering indirect costs from the airport, this is an airport
Yes.
GOA function. So
Right.
we've only assigned direct cost. We've never really gone after the indirect costs of what we do. Is that correct?
Well, let's take that example because I think that I think I can show you. I have a payroll operation. Those officers out at GOA get paid by virtue of an operation within my office, but they don't. But GOA does not reimburse for that. Okay, so GOA should reimburse us for some of these internal costs. When we do the study, we identify those costs that are actually or those activities, indirect activities that are actually benefiting that program. So they're not just getting charged anything, but they do get charged for various oversight that might happen in this building, as well as some of our internal processes that support those employees as they're out there. And then obviously there's superiors within OPD to which those officers report should be also charged back on an indirect basis to GOA, the portion for which GOA benefits from their service.
The last question is about the school resource officers. Doing the quick calculation, $4.4 million of cost to us is about $129,000 per officer or per slot. Mm-hmm. Is that an accurate figure? I mean, I know we've never gotten back our cost to what we've done for OPD, but I never assumed that we were only getting back 20 or 30% of our cost.
That's correct. Yes, it's been low. I do know that Byron has been in conversation with OCPS to gradually bring that up, but I don't think that we can expect that they will ever get to 100%.
I would agree, but $4.4 million, that seems high
well,
to
when
me.
you add in, an average officer. Now we're doing this by averages, by the way.
Right. Yeah.
But an average officer. So you have some long-term officers, some shorter, and then you add in their health insurance and their retirement. It's reasonable. Ray, do you have? I think we've done some pretty good research on that. So that's pretty much what.
I would assume that cost per officer is about $75,000 to $78,000 now, because maybe I'm thinking of the cost per officer and direct benefits, and then there's vehicle related. I understand there's other costs related to it. Don't get me
Right.
wrong.
When you take an officer and then you add to their their salary, which their salary is at a particular level, and it's pretty much, I think, on an average basis, might be fairly close to the number that you just said, maybe a little lower than that, on an average basis across OPD. And then you add their pension benefits and their health benefits, and then there are additional items as well, additional pays that are assignment-based that they may get, the overtime that they may get, that sort of thing.
Yeah. All right. Thank you for being so thorough. I appreciate that. And it's always good to have you share this, especially for the community. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Commissioner Stewart. Commissioner Ortiz.
Thank you, Mayor. Great presentation. That was very detailed. We really appreciate that. And thank you also for Need to look at it. In terms of Goa, do they know that we're not charging them this extra?
We've had some conversations along the way. I think that that's, if that's a direction that we want to explore, then we would take direction from the council to begin those conversations.
No CPS, the same?
I believe those conversations have actually been underway, and I believe the plan is to raise that slightly in next budget fiscal year. We don't know. I don't know what that number is at this point, though.
I might be putting you on a spot here. How much you think our deficit, I mean, ballpark, what are we looking at?
Well, here's my dilemma. I know I don't have enough information to know what our tax roll is going to be, and I think that to the extent that we get some relief from the tax roll, we certainly want to roll that into our decision making. But it is I can say that it's a larger number. Last year, we put $29.5 million of prior year revenues into the budget, and we don't have any to put in this year's budget. So we have to then look at the growth of each of the revenues, and those, that analysis is underway. We should know that just about the time that we start getting some tax roll information. I would anticipate we would come to you similarly to the way that we always do in June. That's usually when we start this process, because then we have the information where we can be a little more specific about it. But at that particular point, we can bring a full picture and actually define this gap. I will say that I believe that it is not a minor amount. It's going to be a big amount. But I think that I'd hesitate to try to guess at this particular point, because I know if I do, I'll be wrong.
In order for us to prepare, I guess we'll definitely need to have some sort of idea. What are we looking at? And in looking into that, what particular department, if we may be able to pinpoint this, are we having a greater deficit? I mean, if we were to, I guess, to figure out what is creating the deficit in the city, can we assign that to a particular department, or is this in general?
Well, I think that the difficulty in our financial situation is not associated with departments. It's associated with revenue streams that are not growing at any at all, and they're large ones. If it were a small one, it wouldn't matter as much.
But that's my point.
But because we have essentially $100 million roughly in property tax that's not growing at all, okay, and we have about $75 million coming from OUC that's not growing at all, then we're at 50% of our budget that's not growing at all on the revenue side. Okay, so even if we get growth in the other areas, they'll only partially address our big issue with those two revenue sources.
So it would be fair to say that it's to pay for all the services.
Right. And in the general fund, we don't really identify. There's certain revenues that we do identify to particular departments. An example would be a planning fee. We identify that planning fee to economic development, but we don't take general fund revenues and identify them to departments. That's a technique that we call funding the budget, and we don't actually do that. We keep it in more of a big bucket, and we want that big bucket to equal the sum of all the other expenses that we have, or we make adjustments either on the revenue side or the expense side.
Why haven't we collected these monies from GOA and OCPS during all these years?
Well, I think that there have been, I guess from the perspective of school resource officers, I think it's just a belief that the city was able in the past to support that for OCPS. I just think that we're less able now. I think that's really the situation. Byron may want to weigh in.
So with respect to the school resource officers, that's not a new phenomenon, nor is it unique to just Orange County and City of Orlando. In fact, the two of you perhaps remember this dialogue going, and certainly all the members of the council remember this dialogue going on for quite some time. Right now, the Chiefs Association, I know Chief Meany has been part of it, all the chiefs in Orange County have been in discussions and negotiations with the Orange County Public Schools about recovering more of that cost. We looked at other counties throughout the state of Florida. It varies. No one is recovering 100%. I will just say that off the top. But we certainly believe that the information we have and we provided shows that Orange County has been providing a lower amount than some of the other jurisdictions. They did make an increase. They did increase the amount this year. Was about, I believe, about a 20% or so increase, and the discussions thus far for next budget year is on tap for perhaps some slight increase, still in discussions about that. So we are trying to move towards closing that gap, but it's not a new phenomenon, nor is it unique to just this community.
I'm not blaming us. I think we're doing a great job. I just want the public to understand the challenges we have and the things we've been doing that people don't know about. And I appreciate that. And one last question. Based on our deficit and contemplating for how long are we going to be in the red in terms of years to come, can we implement a special assessment citywide to cover for this instead of raising the millage?
A special assessment can't be done citywide, no. It has to be for specific authorized activities and services. And so, for instance, we can't just do a special assessment instead of property tax, as an example.
Well, but it would be. Then again, we would have to know exactly what that we were we lacking. So I totally agree with you. Okay. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Commissioner Ortiz. And just to follow up, I'm really proud of our city managers, police chief, fire chief, department directors, because they have all over the last, 8 or 10 years managed within their budgets. And that has enabled us up until this year. They managed it so well that they have returned unspent revenue at the end of years that we've been able to utilize, bring forward into the next budget year that's actually plugged the holes that we had the last several years going into this, and we've spent that down, and that's why we're confronting this at this point, is we are not going to have a surplus of unspent revenue at the end of this year. We're going to probably have a budget that ends up being pretty much on track with what we had in place for on October 1st.
Excuse me, Mayor, if I could. I think it's important to recognize as well that we basically took a $15 million haircut on the expense side this year that we're asking the department directors to manage to, which essentially is the same thing. In other words, they're delivering the services at $15 million less than full funding for those services through their good management. So I just want to recognize them for that.
Right. Commissioner Ortiz.
Mayor, I just wanted to follow up with what you just said. Also, another reason to recognize and congratulate our departments is they have done a wonderful job getting grants to cover for a lot of the handicaps that we had in the past, and accolades to you guys. You guys have done a wonderful job, so thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Sheehan.
Well, and I think that that's an important point to reiterate. The loss of grants between SAFER and COPS is substantial. It's not a small amount of money. It's, what, $18 million on SAFER, was it, or something like that? So
It's smaller than that, but it's still a substantial amount.
between the both of them, it was around that, but it's a lot of money. So a concern that I've got about flat rate service fees is that they impact those that can least afford it. That's my concern. When we do ad valorem, that's, those who have more can pay more kind of thing. That's the only concern that I've got about that. And, tax reform seems to always impact the least fortunate and benefit the wealthy, especially with the caps on commercial property. So that's a concern that I have, and raising millage is just a more fair way to do that. But I have a question on these fees, though. Are they deductible on federal income tax? Because I know you can deduct your ad valorem tax on your federal income tax, but can you deduct these fees? I'm just, and that may be something we need to answer later. I'm not sure.
Mm-hmm. I think we can take that up a little bit later. It's a little bit complex, and there's a lot of confusion because of the way we bill it here. But we can take that up. Technically, it's not deductible, but because it's billed on the tax bill, I think that generally people do.
Okay, and like I say, that's a concern that I have, because again, that's someone who is at a lower rate. That's something they can write off on their income tax and at least get a little bit of relief that way. And if we go to fees, more and more fees, if they can't do that, again, that's disproportionately impacting people from lower income levels. I agree that the GOA reimbursement just needs to happen. That's we can't just keep being sugar daddy and sugar mama forever. We have to kind of make up the difference. I do have a concern about the school resource officers, though, because as they're talking about going more to these K through 8 schools, they're only putting school resource officers at the elementary school level, even though we have older children, even though middle school should have a full-time officer. And my concern is that there's going to be less safety for children in schools, so I'm concerned about the assessment impacting safety in our schools, especially if they're going to K through 8s. They're already doing a 25% resource officer when you're dealing with 8th graders that are getting in trouble, and they're already having, I know that at Blankner they're already having to pull from the Boone resource officer, so I have a real concern about that, overall with safety of our kids in our schools. If they're already kind of not allocating the amount of officers necessary to make sure the kids are safe, and I just want to make sure that we don't make it so onerous in terms of cost that we sacrifice child safety in the schools. So I do think we should be getting our fair share back, but again, that's something that I've seen that's been a problem with these K through 8s not having enough officers on hand to deal with some of the disciplinary problems with the older children. And again, they're trying to do things cheaper, but it might not be in the best interest of public safety. Like I say, I think there's a lot of things we need to look at, fees and everything else, in terms of this whole process. But again, I do believe that ad valorem is the most fair way to assess, and I think there's a lot of things we need to be looking at. But again, we've been doing less with more. We've been getting grants to offset these shortfalls that we've had, and we just don't have a whole lot of options. But again, people don't seem to understand. They say, well, in my household budget, I can cut expenses and I can not take a vacation, but you know what, we don't get that option. We still have to put a police cruiser on the street when gas goes up to $5 a gallon. We can't cut back on that service. We can't cut back service. So to compare it to a household budget, when our expenses keep going up, when our income is not going up, I think that puts us in a situation with a structural imbalance, and it's really not fair to us as the people who manage the city to put us in that situation and make comparisons where we're just not able to cut services that are so necessary to the public. So thank you, Rebecca.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Gray.
Thank you, Mayor. And Rebecca, thank you. I apologize, coming off a cold here, so forgive me. I should know this, I don't. How does our millage rate compare to other Florida cities of our size?
We usually provide you with that information when we do our June budget, the budget presentation. But I believe that at this particular point, we're kind of in the middle of the pack. Ray, can you add? Yeah, pretty much in the middle. The last slide that I think we did, we were kind of in the middle of them. But we'll show you how that stratifies right now.
Okay.
We're certainly not the highest millage rate by any stretch.
Right, thank you. In this package on the revenue side of the equation, specifically page 9 and 13 with our property values, have we looked short-term, Rebecca, of the growth? I'm being selfish thinking in my area, which has rapid growth, both commercial and residential. Have we looked at what that taxable base may look like 2 to 5 years out?
No, because it's very difficult for us to project property values at all.
Right.
We don't get a lot of information that we can do that. So we haven't really done projections, even for, back of the napkin kind of projections. Yes. Okay. So we'll say, well, it's probably going to raise at the pretty much an inflation rate. So we'll use 3% and be conservative. But from the perspective of actually doing, a fairly sharp analysis of this, we just don't have enough information to be able to do that. I think that just based on a sort of broad brush, Commissioner, I think that we can anticipate that our growth is going to be really in 3 areas of the city. I think we're going to see it downtown. I think we're going to see some out in the Universal area in this next tax roll. And then we'll see some out in the Lake Nona area. And then we're going to see some fairly general increase just in valuations. Okay, but remember that the increase in valuations is going to be capped. Mm-hmm. So I really have new construction, which I don't know what my new construction is right now. Mm-hmm. And then I know that we're going to probably see valuation increases, but I don't know how much of that's going to be capped. So that's the difficulty that we have. I would hope that, you know, we can probably do some breakdowns. We do have the ability now to break down our tax roll by district, which we haven't before. But, you know, we can do some of that breakdown.
Well, and I understand that.
Just not projections.
I understand that. It's feeling like we're going to ask citizens that they need to, if they want the same level of service, they need to pay more for that, or else we don't pay more and we compromise on services, one or the other, and those are the choices. But if we're going to ask folks to pay more, it feels to me like we should have an estimate of what it's going to look like over the next 2 to 5 years, as opposed to just where we are today. That's just commentary. Because when you look at this whole presentation, great, but it's strictly the revenue side of the equation. And being new to the council, I know there's been a lot of work done here to cut costs and to really make it an efficient city. But again, if we're going to ask folks to keep the same level of service but pay more because it costs more, it feels to me like we need to demonstrate what we've done as a city to minimize those costs and how we're going to control those costs. Not saying we haven't done it. I'm sure we've done it. But when you look at this presentation, it only speaks to the revenue side. And as we go down the road, we need, I think, to demonstrate to folks that we are being efficient. And you may have some graphs and presentations which we just haven't seen, but I challenge you there and your team to say, do we need to incorporate that cost savings or the efficiency to help justify or demonstrate to people that we have looked at the expense side and we are as efficient as we can be. And any further cuts we make really aren't going to move the needle. So you've dealt with the expense side, but I just don't think we have demonstrated that.
Okay. We'll try to do better. In some of our
This is strictly a suggestion.
No, I understand. I think, you know, the one thing that I'm kind of looking at, just to sort of share my position on it, is that we have reduced our budget recurring. This is every year without adjustment for inflation. We're at $41 million. So had we done nothing over the last 6 years, the problem that we're talking about here would be $41 million worse than it is. So we handled all of those things on the expense side. That's 100% expense cuts at $41 million, at $123 million in the aggregate over that time period. So, and all of that, by the way, were cuts that were outside of sworn public safety employees. So we're taking essentially 1/3 of our budget and cutting that budget by significant amounts. And so I think, you know, we can lay that out a little more clearly in the next presentation. But you know, I think that we're kind of to the point where we're going to have to either begin to reduce our services in public safety. If we're going to get the numbers we need, we have to reduce our public safety expenses. And I guess just as I had my guys run just some thumbnail sketches, but a fire station annually cost about $2.5 million, not including the debt service on the facilities that we've built recently. And 25 police officers is about $3 million. So that kind of gives you a sort of a ballpark of the reductions that you could do. Now, can you reduce other places? Yes, you can. But as I demonstrated in the last presentation, many of the other areas of the city produce revenues as well as expenses. They're fee-based. So as a result, if you're going to cut the people, then you can't deliver the service, so you can't get the revenue, and it's a net zero proposition.
If you interpreted that I was saying that we didn't cut, I misspoke. I'm not suggesting we haven't cut. What I'm saying is when you look at the presentation, if I'm a citizen with zero info, and you're asking me to perhaps pay more of a fee or a tax, there is nothing in here that talks about what we've done to control costs, other than a statement that says we've cut those. For instance, if we could break it down in general departments, again, it's all about choices. Perhaps some citizens would argue, hey, maybe we're spending too much in certain categories, fill in the blank, parks and recs, public works, whatever that might be, and we should spend more in public safety. I don't know, but the only comment or info we have on cost savings is a general statement that we've done it, and I'm not doubting that we have. I think it helps tell the story if we show not only revenue challenges, which you've done a great job of, but also the challenges we have on the expense side, that we really have limited our services to what we can afford. So, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Lynham.
Just one closing thought, and I agree with you, Commissioner Gray, but sitting here so long, I've seen the cuts. I've seen how at least District 5 and other places look when we do not cut the medium in those roadways, pick up the way, and how we've changed our solid waste pickups to the carts and whatnot. But you're right. I think everybody has to be on the same page. But one of the issues I forgot to mention earlier, in addition to calling for a slight millage increase, was years ago we used to call it license taxes, and now we call it local business tax. And a lot of small businesses like beauty shops and barber shops, these very small businesses that require picking up these licenses, just can't stand another thing, because a lot of them are being so impacted that wherever we're going to go, we really have to be, I think, sensitive to our population. We have been, my 16 years here, very generous with security and public safety. To the point, I think I just saw Bernie leave a minute ago to our fire training, where commissioners would go to. We would go out and do our fire training, and I got trapped on my thing and had to tell the firefighter to push my butt just to get me out of that firefight. And just saying, we've done everything to make sure fire and police get everything they've needed, and to hear that they return some of those fees for things for budget items they didn't use because of grants and other things is really gratifying. But I really want us to laser in on small businesses, keep us going, and I don't want to see barbershops just disappear, because each barber, I believe, in a shop, they may have 20, whatever you call them, have to get their own individual license, and it keeps going up, and you're down to 10. We've got to help them, but not at the cost of saying, Orange County Public Schools, you got to step up a little bit. GOA, you got to step up a little bit. OUC, you got to step up. Let's go for the sources, because they're charging us fees, and here in the city, we need to be, we need to act as though we're poorer than we are. I mean, we're poor. We're not doing real good. There was a day of a lot of plentiness. We don't have it anymore. So we've got to be prudent in terms of receivables, is what it is. There's just an imbalance. And I understand Commissioner Gray said we got to show that balance. But there is. You just proven. We haven't gotten everything we could get from Orange County Public Schools, but we know Orange County Public Schools is having a problem. So we don't want to go up to that 3.7 million difference or whatever, but we want something. What about 2? You can owe us 1.7, but at least give us a little more. Gore, pay a little more, but not hurt our small businesses. We've got to help them survive. And we can't hurt our residents, except when you own a house. There's one thing, and I have learned, a lot of people buy a house, they don't understand maintenance deferred is blight. It turns into blight. But we can do that few dollars more, even in retirement, to make sure we're in a safe place, make sure our neighborhood looks right. But whenever you go into these budget negotiations, please think about what it takes the city to do to survive. Small businesses, we have got to look at them. We've got to help them. We've got to just, it's not hands off, but we've got to do something to ensure their survival. And our residents, poor people, we've got a lot of poor people or low income. So we've got to look, how do we balance this thing to get good services and take care of our residents? Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Commissioner Pierce. Stewart.
A couple of quick questions following up with Commissioner Gray, and I do agree with Commissioner Gray in terms of concept. The challenge that I look at is, are we going to be doing the same thing next year? So we're getting ready to make a bold step in direction. But the idea is that we increase our ad valorem tax to cover a $20 million deficit. Will that deficit be there next year? And will it be there the year after? And have we embarked on a method that basically says, here's how we're going to address it? I know we've had that discussions, privately, that this, we need to embark on a permanent solution to this somewhere along the line. And I believe that, Commissioner Gray is right, that the 3 to 5 year, we know enough with what we have that we can kind of project that a little bit. But even so, in projecting it, we still may be in the position of raising ad valorem tax, let's say $500,000 to cover what we're going to do. Are we going to do $500,000 the following year and $500,000 the following year until we get to a point where there's nothing left? So we've got to come up with that solution. I'm so appreciative of your creativity to look at some of these choices, and I think it's good to do that. The other challenge that I have when I begin to look forward is, are there other specifics? Commissioner Ortiz mentioned it came to mind. Where are we in possibly a Parks and Rec fee? We have a choice. I mean, that is a specific use that we have, and that's money out of the general revenue. And I know that there's I think there's a Parks and Rec fee in the county that they charge.
That's an impact fee,
Okay.
and that's solely for capital and solely for expansion.
Okay.
Okay, so it wouldn't come into the general fund at all. We
Okay.
could do that. We can we can levy an impact fee for recreation, but it would be handled similarly to our transportation impact fees,
Okay.
and that would be outside of the general fund and would not address the problem that we're dealing with.
How does the county do that? Don't they have a separate impact, separate fee just for facility use to cover
Yeah,
Parks and Rec?
They do, and they handle that in a separate fund. And I've just told you everything that I know about the
Okay.
county's fee. So
All right.
I'm going to ask Byron to come up.
Yeah. Byron may actually know this answer.
Things change.
And actually, Rebecca answered the question. They have the impact fee. Now, again, going years back, the county, they petitioned off a portion of just the countywide millage rate and designated, but it wasn't a official dedication, but designated a portion to Parks and Rec, for example. But that was just on a more administrative matter. It was not a separate MSTU for parks or anything of that nature. The only thing that's actually legally authorized for Parks and Recreation is their Parks and Impact fee, which is capital based. And we are early this year, actually last year, the mayor did give us authorization to explore, do the study of a Parks Impact fee as we looked at other revenue sources. So we are in the midst of finishing that evaluation.
Okay. All right, good. Thank you very much. That's all I have.
Commissioner Ortiz.
This time I'm coming out to defend you. Okay?
We all want to defend her.
We can't expect her to know what to do in the next few years because that all depends on the economy. So, but we very much appreciate how conservative you are in terms of figuring out what's best for our city and for our constituents. So I just want to say thank you once again, and to remind us, I guess, that we know that you rely on what the report of the property appraisal is and how we're doing in the economy. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Ortiz. Thank you, Rebecca and team. More to come. That'll conclude our workshop for today.